Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining Analytic Stories today. Happy to have a friend and colleague, Shilpam Pandey, with us. Shilpam, good to see you as always.
Great to see you too, Lee. I'm happy to be here.
All right. So let's just jump right in to a 1 minute answer. So, thinking over your career, what's the one thing you heard that changed your view on analytics?
So many things, Lee. But if I was to pick one, I'm going to pick one that recently gave me pause and made me think. It's from the movie Coded Bias.
Oh, yeah.
It's directed by Shalini Kantaya. And the main subject is the MIT Media Lab researcher Joy Bolumbini, where she says something like AI is forward-looking, but it's based on data. And data essentially is a reflection of our history, what has happened, right? And it really made me stop and think, that's right. Like as we define the future, there's this huge opportunity for us to kind of redefine the future, not just based on what happened, but to define a better future based on data. So recognizing that the data is a reflection of our history. And as we define the future, as it becomes more of a digital world built on algorithms and AI and machine learning.
Yeah. I think that makes sense too, because I started watching it and I think I got pulled away by one of the other many things that are on Netflix to draw your attention. So I have to finish watching it. But yeah, everybody's focused on this idea of AI and machine learning and prediction, but most people don't really know if you're not in the field. It's all based on the past.
Well, ramifications, right? The movie goes into it too a little bit, but whether it's access to housing or jobs or loans or mortgages, so many things, admissions, and now teacher evaluations and things like that. Huge human real world consequences for everybody. It's not just data people, it's their
Hmm.
actions. So that leads to that for me.
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think that's a great recommendation too for folks who haven't heard of it or watched it yet to take a look at that, especially the folks who are listening here, but even for their families and friends, like you said, it filters into every part of life. Now, let me introduce Shilpam to you. She is the data program leader at M&T Bank, and she established and is heading up the data literacy and culture program, which I love. And that's how we met because of my involvement with data literacy. I really love the focus of what she's doing because I think it's not just about data and working with data. It's really driving around decision making, which I think is a key issue that people still forget about, that the whole reason about the data is making decisions and taking action. And we lose sight of that, I think, with all the things about data governance, data visualization, et cetera, et cetera. And she's got a really interesting background. She studied all over the world. She was at the School of Planning and Architecture in New Delhi and a master's from ITC in the Netherlands and an MBA from Cornell. I'm a Cornellian. I don't have an MBA, but I have my master's in engineering from there. I think this whole thing about coded bias too, you're involved with women and leaders in data and AI, which of course is a big thing about bias in data, and an advisory board at the Pragmatic Institute. Thanks so much for being here. I think you're going to bring a great variety of perspectives to some conversation for the day.
Thank you for the nice introduction, Lee.
Yeah. Well, it's all you. I'm glad that we're finally able to make this happen. All right. So let's get into a little bit more detail. So I think, and I've worked in banking and more than almost any other industry. I think like financial services is really built on data today. In the past, right, it was all about moving physical money, and over time, it's really evolved. And money is just data now, right? It's in our phones. We
Mhm.
have payments from there. Everything is Venmo or PayPal. It's all becoming electronic. You've dealt with, such a large and varied amounts of data in the bank. What's a recommendation that you could give to organizations that maybe are a little bit earlier in their journey around working with data and where it's going to take them.
Yeah, so you're absolutely right. Most companies, definitely banks, it's all about data, right? Like we live in a digital world. And I'm early in any organization's data journey. Like you said earlier, I'm focused on the adoption aspects, the enabling or, making it usable. How do you kind of drive towards a data culture?
Yeah.
So in the early stages, it's really important to have alignment on the vision and the executive buy-in. And when I say the executive buy-in, it's beyond the, yes, we need to do this and fund the program and things like this. The buy-in needs to include leading by example. So leadership truly needs to adopt and use data as a part of who they are, really embedded in their decision-making process. And the other big thing that I say that I think it's important to appreciate and acknowledge and discuss it, that it's a journey and it's a path and it's not linear. So it's a combination of the two. The transformation needs to start at the top. There might be some meandering. The path might not look straight to go from A to B, but you'll get there and you're going to learn along the way.
So what are some things that you've come across like that, where maybe people had planned, there's always something people expect or go in this line. Where were some of the spots where kind of got off a little bit on the side of the road to venture into a different place?
Oh, so many. I mean, if you look at last year, for example, whether it was within the entire world, like within our program, when we started 2020, there was a plan in place. And very quickly, essentially over a weekend, the pandemic changed everything. So that was like a major disruption and really an unplanned stress test for organizations that required everyone to pivot. But there's a lot of that in data programs. Come across these major catalyzing events like the pandemic, but other minor, whether there's a tactical reason that the data can't be used, or it's not available, or there are data quality issues, or there are people issues. The ability to learn and grow from your own experiences and adapt to what the organization needs is critical. It's really about the ability to adjust quickly based on data.
And I think that's also one of the hardest things, because when you say adapt, organizations in general are not quick to adapt, and people are slow to adapt as well to change. So are there any stories you can tell about where you've encountered those kind of situations where some kind of change was required, and how did you deal with that? Because like we said in the beginning, a lot of stuff focuses on maybe more the technical side of things, and right. And there's just more people stuff.
Absolutely. I want to pick on the word that you used in asking the question, because that's one of the things that we do. So, we are heavily focused, like we've talked about in the past, in terms of enabling the community or enabling peer-to-peer learning in our data community. One of the things that we do is a monthly workshop called Deal, which is Drop Everything and Learn.
Okay.
And we launched it last year, 2020, January. Then, we had a plan in place, going to be once a month, very manageable, things like that. And we had, the first one, and then the pandemic hit. Like a week before we were supposed to have the March session, essentially the pandemic hit. At that moment, it was like, oh, what do we do? And, nothing was clear. If you remember, it was, like, is this a week? Is it a couple of weeks? Of course, a year and a half later. But once we got over that initial, like, what do we do now? That was a huge opportunity. Every crisis provides an opportunity. And the opportunity that the crisis provided us last year was to go digital or go totally virtual with our deals, with our monthly sessions. Our biggest limitation with Deal used to be, when we were in person, was finding a room that would accommodate enough people. So we could never do it for more than 50 people. Now, all our deals are 150 people, because that is the opportunity. It truly democratized access to data or to data learning. It didn't have to be physically in a location. And really the ability to break out into smaller groups, it provides a much richer learning opportunity, and we focus it around data. But that's a minor adaptation that I'm talking about that we needed to do, where you get, something hits you which you hadn't planned for, was not anticipated, throws your clients for a loop. You don't know how long it's going to last. Figuring out, how do we adjust to this, and how do we kind of use this to our advantages? Because you see companies doing this all the time as well, right? Like, I mean, customer expectations have changed in the last year, and being
Sure.
able to adjust to this changed expectations, I think it's going to be critical going forward. I mean, the last year has, if you weren't digital before, it forced many more of us to go digital. And once people are used to this digital virtual world,
Mm.
nobody wants to go back to, I call it the tyranny of averages. Well, the world's designed around me. And it's not just the digital. I think society is going through a lot of change. We're looking for more meaningful experiences. I think the world, there's been a paradigm shift, and the ability to adjust, to adapt, to learn from your experiences is going to be critical.
There's a couple points that you made. One, it reminds me of this morning when, when I used to go pick up a coffee, right, at a store, you used to, you still can, but you'd go in and wait in line. And now in some places, you don't even have to go in, right? You just could sit in your car, or you can go on the app and say, I'm just going to walk in and pick it up. And you just walk in and it's already sitting there, and you just go in and leave. And people are saying, well, that's a lot more convenient. It gives me the freedom of time. It's much easier. But you said that what you did with Deal was a small change, but I think that a lot of those small changes start to add up over time, because now if you go from 50 to 100 people, 150 people, you're reaching more people. If you're seeding new ideas, those people are bringing ideas into their organizations and making small changes, you hope, and that spreads. So it doesn't always have to be a major undertaking of change to have an impact. And sometimes maybe even the smaller ones are easier because people, it's like the thing with the frog and boiling a frog. If you throw it in a pot of hot water, it just jumps out. But if you raise the heat slowly, it stays in. The dramatic changes are much harder on an organization, and the small ones I think can grow. And I love that idea that you were able to do that kind of digital change, and how you saw it. These digital changes are expected now, and that's just making more data.
Absolutely. Yes, I was thinking of that as you were talking about your coffee experience. Think about the data that's generated all around, right? Your preferences and what time you come in, what you like, things like that. And the ability to predict. I mean, we talked about coded bias. Do you like a croissant with it? Or like there's so much to
Mhm.
be an aggregator. There's so much more. Like, do people in certain zip codes prefer that entire experience? The ability to, well, the amount of data generated just grew manifold in the last, in a digital world, really, not just the last year.
Yeah, and we're just giving it up. We don't think about it as data necessarily as an individual. We're just like, I'm just ordering a coffee or whatever it is. But at some point, it's people will realize that it is their data, and they're handing it off to whatever organization. And but it's for convenience, and people are willing to trade these things off, I think, over time. It's as long as they don't feel it's being abused or blatantly know it's being abused, then I think most people are like, okay. I think the younger generation just kind of lives with it. That's just how I live. And their levels of concern are a lot different than people who have been around, I think, a little bit longer, like me and you, how we see the world. We have our own biases, like you said, and our bias is one way and their bias is another. And companies are going to have to deal with these things. So speaking of being comfortable with giving away data or not, I got a little bit of a twist of a question. We started to touch on it. So you're leading up the efforts around data literacy, and this is a big area that's important to me that I really think about a lot. And one of the problems with I think the term data literacy is, that focusing on the data part really drives people to think more about the technology side of data literacy, which could include data governance and data ethics. And I mean, I think that's fine, but I don't think it deals enough with the people side, which we just hit on a little bit when you start talking about community. So how are you balancing these things, the technical side and the human side? And what are the areas that you see maybe making people a little bit uncomfortable when you start to figure out where do you need to do the transformations around these things?
the cultural transformation aspects of it. That's the hard part. And how do you do that is $1 million question. I do take a broad approach when it comes to data literacy. So it's not just about learning and doing stuff. It's about how you think. And really, last year, for example, I think was a great example of mass data literacy with people suddenly wanting to look for dashboards and what does the data say. But it's changing that mindset. That's hard. And within organizations, what we talked about earlier, that ability to learn and adapt and having a sustained effort is critical. It's not about the technology, like you said. There have been tremendous advancements in technology and a lot of investments made in building our data assets. It's really about being able to get the people to use it that makes a difference. Probably the biggest indicator, predictor of success in forging a data culture is talent. And it's a change management strategy that organizations adopt. How do you kind of come at it from many different, we call it a multi-pronged approach? Really to gain traction, I think, and to have a lasting impact, to have that true transformation, we need to focus on multiple aspects and at all levels of the organization. It's not just about, the data people querying data prep skills, data storytelling skills. It's about everyone. And there's no one magic pill to swallow and be, tomorrow I'm a transformed data-led culture. It's a process. It's a journey, like I said earlier. And a critical component of it is thinking holistically, but also empathetically. Looking at it from the outside, in understanding what does it feel like at the other end? Like, what are the consequences? Like, I'm big on thinking holistically and empathetically. That's kind of when I talk about coded bias, that's what it makes you really think. Like, it's not just about the algorithms and it impacts people's lives. Like, what am I doing and why am I doing it? What does this mean? Where did the data come from?
You're saying people like internal users, or are you thinking the customers of the bank or both?
Broadly, all of us, like we as people living in a digital society needs to, digital world is built on data, like your coffee, when you talk about all of us, but within organizations, I think it's important as leaders or as we think about trying to transform organizations to be more a data culture or have more data-driven decision-making. It's important to have that people aspects, the change management aspects, but look at it from a holistic perspective. And when I say holistic, I'm talking about things like have the empathy or the understanding of what am I doing? Why are things looking the way, if you look at a dashboard, like, well, the dashboard tells me that the trend up or down. Why is it? Where does the data come from? Ask those bigger questions.
So do you have an example you can share? Because I love that idea, because I think you're touching on some points that go beyond just the data itself. Looking, like you said, I'm not just going to look at a chart. What else is around that information that I need to take into account is something I think doesn't happen very much.
It doesn't, and that's why we need to focus on data literacy for everybody, those broad strokes, or the broad approach for data literacy. That's all the things, and I don't want to, tread on any political statements, but if you look at the dashboards that are being put out around COVID numbers, what are those numbers counting? What numbers are being reported? What did they include? What did they not include? Why are the numbers going up? Did something change in the definition of how we are defining who's affected, not affected, who's dying, who's not dying on COVID? So that's like a basic question. You're looking at a data story that's presented to you as a nice dashboard. It impacts how I'm going to act, whether I'm going to a restaurant or not, or, it impacts and real world consequences to what the risk that I'm willing to take. But asking that question, thinking about it holistically from a data perspective, both as a consumer, but then also as a data analyst, whoever wrote the story or created that dashboard, you need to think about it holistically. I mean, that's one example that I think is widely relatable, perhaps.
Yeah, it's pretty cool, because when you see things publicly, people are putting things like where the data came from, or, they're noting sources and things of that nature. I see that, but most people are then going back into the data. There's this quick assumption like, oh, they listed the data source. So they're using it all they're using it all in the right way. And your point is, wait, maybe not. What did they leave out? Or did they leave something out to make the story different? Or did they leave something out for a fair reason, but it's still not noted and it might be helpful to know that? Or it's almost like the writers, notes to themselves kind of thing. Like, how did they go through the analysis even? What went into it? Usually you don't know how they thought about it. You're seeing the end result. You're not hearing about the story that they went through to take the data, clean it up, think about it. I think that would be really interesting if people did more of that. Give you the background into it would be helpful, I think, to many people.
Yeah, and that's where the data quality, the data governance aspect comes in. And I'm not saying everybody needs to be an expert in that, but at least look at the data and be like, why do the numbers? So I grew up in India, like you said, oh, like if you think when I was growing up, you think about it like, oh, poverty rates are down by 30%. I'm making up numbers, obviously.
Hmm.
Why? Did they change the definition of poverty? If like, so asking those, and just thinking about it holistically, I think it's critical. Thinking about it in context.
It's important, but it's an even greater challenge because it's so hard to just, we know in this field, get people to understand the basics when they're working with the information and how to interpret it, because being an analyst is hard. It's not, yeah, I think there's this, like,
Yeah.
I talk about this all the time. It's like, oh, here it is. And you could still give people the greatest visual story. And that doesn't mean they're automatically going to know how to interpret it and do something with it. I think that this is a huge mistake that organizations are making, that it's just, oh yeah, like being an analyst is difficult. And I also think, this is my bias, most people are not analytical. I think people have certain ways that they think. And I don't think that everybody has an analytical mindset either. And these are roadblocks. And I'm not saying that that's a bad thing about somebody. I think it's just a fact. Certain people are more creative thinking versus me, right? Maybe I'm not that kind of creative thinker that they are. And it's just who we are as individuals.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. Like everybody thinks differently. Some are more creative, more analytical. Like yes, we approach. That's what is so interesting about that. But uh, I'm forgetting the name of the economist. There's an economist that says if you torch data long enough, it will confess to
Oh, yeah,
everything.
I've heard that one.
Yeah, and as long as you appreciate that, because when I hear things like, well, I know I'm right because the data said so. You can think and say whatever you want it
Right.
to say. Like it's to your point, not everybody needs to be the data analyst. It's a hard job, but think about it. Why is it the way is it? It isn't.
Yeah, I think the idea of understanding the history of it, what and the surrounding, the holistic understanding of it all is something that I think organizations will have to handle as it progresses, especially as there's more data. And I think also, especially as it becomes more driven out of algorithms and machine learning, not just taking it as face value that got computed and crunched out. That's like, okay, that's it. Knowing the background of it would be really helpful in how it got there. So I'm sure we could kind of talk about this a lot. But I have one more really important question I want to get to. Shilpam lives in Buffalo. So I just wanted to set the context for this next question. So I imagine a lot of people that you work with are fans of the Buffalo Bills. And I bring this up because last year, their quarterback, Josh Allen, I love football. He went from this guy who was like, yeah, okay. And all of a sudden he became this superstar from one year to the next. It was, that's all the analysts could talk about, was how he made this tremendous jump. So for us, as thinking about analytics practitioners, what one skill do you think is most important for us to improve to become superstars?
Yeah, Buffalo Bills, you know, last year. Even I knew who the quarterback was. But I think in the data space, of course, there are those, the superstars. But it's really about the unicorns, right? Think about data, like really be that true analytical thinker, but it's having that communication service, having that empathy about being able to think. But really, when I think about data teams, it's not that everybody needs to be a unicorn or everybody needs to be a superstar. Data is a team sport. I truly believe that. Early this year, yeah, we wrote an article about how data is a team sport. You need, he was Josh Allen, I know, but the rest of the team, there were some amazing team members that made it possible for the Buffalo Bills to have an amazing season. So yes, be able to tell those, do the analysis, do the data prep work, do everything, and be able to communicate is amazing. But I think I'll go back to my point about empathy. I think that goes to us as humans. In addition to the communication skills and the analytic things, I think it's important to see things in context, look at things from the other perspective, have the empathy. And like I was talking about earlier with the movie Coded By, it makes you appreciate there are real world consequences to the way we analyze data or any organization. So it's important to understand the power that can be wielded with data. As data people, I think it's important to think about what are you working on, ask better questions of your data, think about why is it the way it is, what is missing, and the quote I quoted Jay Bolambini earlier, data is a reflection of our history. Like how can we think about, as we go about our analysis, put that in context.
Is there something in particular that you have done to help people think that way a little bit more? I could just think like at a bank, if somebody applies for a loan and loans are just coming out of some algorithm these days and they kind of gives you a thumbs up or a thumbs down a lot of times. And there's the loan officer just looks at that and says, you've been approved or not approved. And that's it in most cases. So how do you get people to be more empathetic around the data?
And behind those algorithms are people. And those are the people that we work with through our data literacy program, through things like DEAL, or we do a lot of persona-based learning paths, where we come at it from many different perspectives. When I talk about that holistic approach, the system thinking, and that's how I built out the program here as well. DEAL is a major platform that we use to discuss things like data ethics. When you're looking at the data, what is missing? Like, is an indicator of something else. So if you look at, say, census data, for example, or if you're looking at income levels by zip code, there's a lot of bias built in by the time you got the data, right? So as you pick the sample data sets to train your models, or as you build out the models, it's important to have the broader context in mind. One, data is a reflection of history. And to have that mindset in terms of where did this data come from? How was it defined? Think about the other end of it. How does it impact people? We live in a digital society, and data is the backbone. Like we are all in it together. We need to figure out how the actions that we take, sitting on a lab, building out some cool algorithm, has in the real world.
A couple of things you said, and then we'll finish up. I love that idea of data as a team sport. It's making me think about, what does that really mean? I'm going to sit on that one for a bit, but I'm getting this picture when you talk about all these ideas about where did it come from and what's the impact. It's almost like when someone starts a project or to create a product, however you do your work or different organizations do their work, it almost seems like that should be part of the definition of the work, that there should be effort put into it up front to lay out all of those things, because it may actually create some different thinking about the design of the product in certain ways, or it may think about different information that needs to be captured. This could go in a lot of directions, but to me, it's an expansion of thinking about what you're doing. I'm trying to think of the practical aspects of how do you go from the idea, the theory of it would be good to actually, how do you make that happen? Because that's really the end, right? Is the execution of these theories or concepts, like being holistic, is you have to work them into the organization somehow so it happens. happens in a consistent way.
But
It's the first time I really have thought about it in that way. And I'm just kind of noodling on it.
there's a lot to what you're saying in terms of, the prep part of it. And so, yes, we can dig into it later. Yes, there is a lot of intertwining there in terms of how do you even think about it? How do you insert it at every stage of the process, not hand it off? And that'll be the next one.
Yeah, I think I'm going to put a panel or something together on that one because I'm really liking this idea. Anything else before we close out? Any other thoughts you want to share with folks quickly?
No, we talked about so many different things. I highly recommend Coded by It. Thank you so much for having me, Lee. It's been really a pleasure and very interesting to speak with you. Thank you.
Thanks so much. And thanks for bringing up a lot of great ideas that haven't come out in some of the previous conversations I've had on the channel. So always great to see you. Would love to get together. Everybody, again, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode. Bye.
Bye-bye.